Hello, and welcome to the Pragmatic Live podcast series, where we tackle the biggest challenges facing today's product management, product marketing, and other market and data-driven professionals with some of the best minds in the industry. I'm Rebecca Kalogeris, Vice President of Marketing at Product Strategy at Pragmatic Institute, and your host for this episode. I am absolutely thrilled to have on Dave West, CEO and product owner at Scrum.org. Dave was a recent guest on our Product Chat webinar series. We had several hundreds of people join us, several others watching us live stream on YouTube as we filled up our room, all wanting to kind of unwind the relationship between product owner and product manager. And it was such a great webinar, such engaged audience that we simply didn't get through all the great questions we received. So that's what we're going to do today. Welcome, Dave.
Hi, well, thank you, Rebecca, for inviting me. It's good to be talking about this. And yeah, it seemed like people actually are interested in some of the challenges around these two sets of responsibilities.
So let's first level set for those who weren't lucky enough to join us that day. Give us the kind of the background on Dave and Scrum.org, and then sort of really what, the umbrella topic that we dug into there.
Hey, yes. So for the people that don't know me, my name's Dave West. I'm the CEO here at Scrum.org. We're an organization that was created by one of the creators of Scrum, Ken Schwaber. And our mission is to help people and teams solve complex problems. We have a trainer community of about 350 trainers throughout the world, and we have people doing assessments, certifications, passing tests, and a body of knowledge around Scrum. We have about 1.3 million people come to our website every month to use and to talk about Scrum and to debate some of the nuances and challenges that Scrum has created in their organization.
Awesome. And again, this is a topic that every time we cover with you is so popular, and it's somewhat simple and complex, right? There are some real simple ways of thinking about it, but when it gets down to it and we're really digging into how it works within an organization, it can seem kind of complex. So we're going to help people see a path through some of that complexity by hitting some of the questions that we got. Are you ready?
Oh yeah, yes, I'll do my best, Rebecca.
All right. So many good questions to choose from, but we're going to start with, let's see, I just completed product development where we used MS DevOps and sprint meetings for the first time. And I was really frustrated by the lack of visibility into the critical path. How do we fix that?
I'm not totally sure what the question is, but let me see if I understand it. So they're doing these sprints. So this person's doing these sprints to go into one sprint, the next sprint, the next sprint. So Scrum fundamentally, the cadence of planning is this idea of the sprint, the idea, because you're working in a complex situation, that you don't necessarily know what you know until you know you don't know it. So you focus on doing a small chunk of work. That's a sprint. 2 weeks, can't be longer than a month, could be a week, could be a day, I suppose, but that doesn't sound very practical. And you review it, and then that allows you to plan the next sprint based on something called a sprint review, and then how you're working, that's called a retrospective, and that's how the process works, right? And the question seems to be that, well, then hang on a minute, I want to see the critical path. How does all these sprints come together for the release? How does it all fit together? And that's actually a really, really fair question. It is true that you still need to have, Scrum doesn't replace the need to have some sort of roadmap or plan. You need to know where you're going. What it replaces is the day-to-day, how you're going to get there. And it gives you opportunity with the sprint review to look and see how far you've got or how you've not got, as it were, which is the most likely thing. It encourages you to deliver a working increment that can be used by users. So get to the customer earlier so that you get that feedback into your process earlier. So ultimately, you have this roadmap or this broader plan. You incrementally make progress towards it. And hopefully that gives you the ability to refresh that broader roadmap as you learn that, oh my God, the customer doesn't like this, or it takes us a lot longer to do it like this, or it takes us less time to do it like this. You've never heard that one, though. But so ultimately, I think it gives you this incremental, but you still need to have that broad plan. In fact, in the new Scrum Guide that came out in November, the update to the Scrum Guide, what it highlighted was this thing called product goal. And it clearly both it sort of positioned the idea at the product backlog. You have this product goal now, so you can think about that being the sort of instantiation of that roadmap or a certain element of it. So then you continually every sprint review your product goal and your product backlog and see what you should do next. Hopefully that the order and the structure of that is informed by your broad product roadmap. So, it's like we inch forward sprint by sprint, but we do have a destination in mind throughout. Does that make sense, Rebecca?
It does. And I do think this is a common thing we also hear from stakeholders, right? Like
Yeah.
I feel like either I can see something that's coming sometime in the next year, or I know it's coming next week, and how to tie those together. The idea of the product goal as sort of a translation point's not the right way, but
Right.
from the roadmap item to what we're accomplishing here. So it's not just we release these items, it's still talking about the market problem we're affecting and fixing in pieces. Gives maybe a really nice way of finding that balance, because it can be hard when you're really focused on the next 2 weeks or week or day in this crazy world that you've invented to see progress towards the big picture. So I think that makes a lot of
And
sense.
what you said there, Rebecca, is really interesting as well. So stakeholders, they get dragged to the sprint review. Hopefully they want to come, but if not, just use a van and just throw them in the back of it and take them to the sprint review. So you've got these stakeholders. Now they've got a really interesting challenge. And so as a product manager, or a product owner who's brought these people, they want to. They've got this sort of, they know what the problem is, that broad product goal we're trying to solve, or they have a view of it, they have their view of it, and they're seeing some progress against it, hopefully at the sprint. But the question is, how much progress should there be? How much, we often find they have challenges like, well, hang on a minute, you're just giving us this little bit. Well, what about the big thing? Well, we're not doing that now. So they get annoyed about that, or they concentrate so much on the little bit, they forget about providing feedback to the big bit. So as a product manager or a product owner, somebody that's facilitating this conversation, which I do feel that one of the roles or one of the stances, I think would be a cool way of describing it, of a product manager, a good agile product manager, is to act as a concierge to your stakeholders, right? You don't know everything about the product. You've got a development team or development teams working on this, lots of Scrum teams doing the work, but you know how to facilitate a conversation between the stakeholder and those people to really get to the problems, to get to the understanding, to get to the this is good, this is bad, don't like that, and so you have to facilitate that. So that takes skill, and it's
Mm.
really, really hard to do, because you've got to manage both that short-term needs, long-term needs, because ultimately we care about the product goal. Yes, we're making incremental progress to it, so we care deeply about this at this moment, but we have to always bear that in mind. So you have to sort of wear two hats, which is challenging.
And I think a really important thing that sometimes when people are really busy or really in the details, they resent the time it takes for some of those communication points. But fundamentally, that is such a core part of the product manager and product owner's job, is to do that communication. And you do yourself and all your teams a disservice when you don't fully lean into that and invest in it to do it well.
Yeah, and I recently can speak from personal experience. We had a product that we were developing that I thought was fabulous, and I was acting as the sort of like the product owner and the gatekeeper, and I didn't put enough time into that,
Mm.
into getting the right stakeholders. And then when we were just about to launch an MVP, the second version of the MVP, they were like, hang on, it does this, and we have to do that. And there was a whole economic variability area that I hadn't spent as much time keeping people on board, and didn't get that feedback earlier, and dropped. Yeah, and we ended up canceling the product. Now we got lots of good learning and good stuff out of it, which we're using in other places, but it ended up blowing up because I did not do a good enough job doing exactly what you said, Rebecca.
Yeah. We unfortunately, I think, all have a skeleton like that in our closet. That's why we can speak from the pain. All right, here is a question. Oh, man, it's such a fundamental question about how of this all works in an agile environment. How do you balance the time needed to understand the customer problem and the requirements of the Scrum's daily rituals? How do you both be
Yeah,
responsive, inside and outside focused?
so there's a couple of questions sort of hidden in that question. I think ultimately, Scrum shouldn't be a big overhead. 15 minutes a day. If you can't find, I mean, I spend 15 minutes a day arguing. I used to before COVID, arguing with my local coffee guy, and so I don't. 15 minutes isn't a massive overhead. What's interesting though is, when you do sprint planning, which is obviously, longer, can be, 4 hours on depending on the size of your sprint, you are deciding what you're doing. And as you start work, maybe when you learn stuff, you've made all these commitments in the sprint plan. Now, by the way, that isn't true, but you don't make commitments at that level because you don't know the work until you start doing it, right? But people often perceive, because they've made that plan, they're like, oh my God, the plan can't change. And then as you discover stuff, finding time to check with stakeholders, getting their feedback, changing stuff because of that can be a challenge. So I think there's a few things. One, if the events are burdensome, then you're not doing them right. I think that's the feeling. If you're not losing weight on your diet, you're not doing the right diet. So so number one, so make sure you step back from the process, from the sprint or the thing that you're working in, and actually look at it and say, how can we make these more valuable? Scrum informs us, but we must instantiate it in our context. Number one. Number two, make sure, if you've got a large amount of unknown in a sprint because of customers, then don't fill it. Do enough, get started. You can always go back and add more stuff if you need to. Now, this isn't your one chance. Now, hopefully you can articulate a goal called a sprint goal. That goal can then inform what you do bring into that sprint later, and what you start with, and how you manage the work. The last thing I just want to share is something that when I was running engineering and product at my previous organization, in any one sprint, we had a percentage of time for immediate work, H1s, you call that if you're using some sort of horizon planning tool. We had a percentage of the time for H2s and a percentage of time for H3s. Now, guess what? That was a very small percentage at some moments. And in fact, sometimes we ended up saying, no, we're not going to do that. But we had that mechanism in sprint planning to step back and say, should we be looking just at the work for this immediate release? What about doing some spikes for the next release? And can we spend a couple of hours doing some crazy stuff to work out what our future looks like? And we did that every single sprint. We didn't make it the purview of the product owner. We had a product owner, but product manager only. We made it a team activity. And it was incredibly powerful, even though it annoyed the CEO sometimes because we weren't delivering on the cadence that he wanted. But it ended up serving us well, right?
Absolutely. The results, right? The ends justify the means. Okay. So we have lots of questions that are sort of about ratios and structures on teams. Right. So the first one was, can a Scrum team backlog tie to more than one product? And if so, how do you decide what to focus on?
Okay. So can it turn to one product? Okay, let's
tie to more than one
so
product.
The product backlog, by its very name, is about one product. Now, but there's a little bit of semantics here. How you cast that product is your choice. And this highlights an interesting issue that we have. The best, most successful teams that I've ever worked with and ever been involved in not only are aligned to one product, but they're aligned to one set of customer needs. Now, that might be multiple customers. It might be, I don't know how it tends to work out, but they have a very clear boundary of the help that they're giving the world. They have a clear mission. They have a clear sort of model of their position in the world with respect to their customers and the outcomes. And if you grab one of them and ask them, what are they doing? They can usually, though they use different words, clearly articulate the value that the stuff that they're working on adds to those outcomes. Now, that is the fun. That they're the most successful teams. The least successful teams through Scrum, maybe not least successful, but a lot less successful teams from Scrum, tend to have a product backlog that really isn't a product backlog. What it is, it's a team backlog
Mm.
of all the work that their bosses want this team to do, and it's on multiple products, multiple systems, etc. Now, you may argue that therefore the product is not the product the customer uses, but the product is the team, and you can get all semantic on that. However, what I find with those sort of teams is it's very hard to see value. When you ask them, well, what do you do? When you ask them about the value that they're creating, they talk about the work they're doing. And there's this sort of like jump between work
Mm.
and value. They say somebody else worries about the value. I just do this job really well, and it's expressed in a product backlog, and then we pick the first chunk of it that we decided was the most highest priority, or somebody helped tell us, and the product manager facilitated this, and then that's what the sprint is, blah blah blah. So that's a really interesting. Now, is that bad? Well, well, it could be. I mean, ultimately, if the tasks don't necessarily translate into the ultimate value, then that is really bad. So if the person that made that magical decision about what work this team needs to do is making mistakes, then that can be really bad. But the more important reason why it's bad, in my opinion, is motivation, clarity, and innovation. The autonomy, mastery, and purpose, right? Dan Pink's work. We're all very familiar with that. This idea of purpose, this comes back to the sort of like understanding how you fit. Soon as you understand that, you then have the ability to innovate, because that gives you some guardrails or a direction. So teams are the place where innovation happens. It's not a lone person nowadays. The future is about teams directed by amazing product managers, and the greatest teams are ones where the product manager and the teams are working, hence the reason why we have this concept of a Scrum team, working together, and they're innovate, because then you've got 7, 8, 9 heads thinking about this as opposed to one head. So the ultimately, can a product backlog serve multiple products? Of course it can. I mean, but it's not products backlog, but it depends how you cast the product. However, is that necessarily the best thing for your teams? Is that the best thing for, we understand Little's law, we understand efficiency and focus. Is that the best way? Is it better to break teams down and have them more aligned to less products that are more consistent in terms of customers and outcomes? The biggest challenge, I think, Rebecca, and maybe you agree or don't, for product managers today is the alignment, how they what their sort of domain of change is, what their alignment to the customer is. If they're aligned to the software rather than the customer, and that this person, you're responsible for this function that lives in these 57 products, then it makes it very hard for them. If they're aligned, however, to the customer and this part of their business process or value chain or whatever, then it makes it much easier for them to have a vision, measure its success. All of these things become easier. So short answer, yeah, you can have multiple products. Long answer, yeah, I'd avoid it if you possibly can. Obviously, cut the suit to suit the cloth, depending on your context.
Yeah, and I also think there's a little bit of a difference between multiple products that are part of a single solution, right? There's
Yeah.
sort of aspects of one part, because again, then I have a common goal and a common
Yes.
customer base, right? There's complexity there, but it's totally different than I've got 4 products serving 4 different masters and 4 different
Exactly.
pieces.
And
Yeah.
that's even true inside a product as well, by the way. And now some would argue that the product has outlived its purpose then, because it's evolved, to this massively complicated, overloaded thing, as many products do. I remember those days where you're like, we use it for this, we use it for this, we use it for this, but it was actually built for that. And you're like, whoa. Every time you go to a bank, probably is exactly what the situation is. When you go to try to change your ticket, you go to the check-in counter and talk to and they're typing all these bizarre codes and things. And you're like, how you do it? Well, because we had to change this segment, and we had to do that. But you're exactly right. The product backlog ultimately is the embodiment of that goal, And the boundary, nice to have a product boundary, because that means you have a customer, you have a boundary, you know what value means, you can measure it. It's nice to have that. And exactly as you said.
All right. Now, so we have another question, kind of in that ratio spot where we are, as a team, we are struggling getting ahead of delivering on the product requirements. And so Dev is proposing to split into two teams.
Mhm.
And the question is, can product support two teams? If they have one product owner, how does that work? What is the sort of extendability that way across
Yeah, so
multiple teams?
I wrote a book about this called Nexus, which is all about how you use Scrum in a scaling context with respect to scaling the number of teams for one product. So it's different to SAFe and less and all these things, which are more organizational sort of change kind of models. It's more about this. So the short answer is yes. Now, you can, one product owner can serve multiple teams, no problem. That those teams all go to one product backlog, though they have their own sprint backlogs. The other important idea is that you integrate those product teams, their work that they do frequently, so that your sprint review is actually a little bit of a multi-team event. Actually, ideally it is a multi-team event. Retrospective you want to keep separate, because you don't want to air your dirty how you all work together laundry in public, but you should definitely bring that together. Now, the desire to split a team or to split teams or not, it should be influenced by a few things. So teams are really good at high fidelity communicate well. With the right support, it's designed around high fidelity communication. There's rapid connections, and that means that they can't grow to more than sort of 12 people. Honestly, a team bigger than 12 isn't really a team, even if we can pretend. Now, this isn't an absolute measure, because it depends on the team, the maturity. Maybe they share brains or something. I don't know. Maybe they're all clones. Maybe they're all from the same family. Actually, that probably would mean you'd want to split it. But anyway, that's a different thing. But generally, so it breaks down. So if you're going to break your teams up, one, you have to accept that comes at a cost. But you may have to, it all goes back to the Mythical Man Month by Fred Brooks, right? If 10 people, 10 people working on a project takes a week, how long would 20 people? Probably 2 weeks. The sort of a misnomer of throwing people at it. Now, of course, sometimes you need to, because of specialist skills, because of expertise, etc., and that works. So be very careful when you create multiple teams, because if there's massive dependency between those teams, you're going to end up in a bit of a mess, really. Now, what we tend to encourage in Nexus and practices like this, obviously, though I wrote the book, I didn't invent it. This has been practiced for years. Is we tend to try to do something called verification, or bringing things together frequently. We try to, having one product backlog, create transparency by having one sprint review, ensure that everybody knows when they've mucked up. So we try to do things like that to bring these teams together. Now, one product owner, one product manager working with these teams, the challenge they have is they can't be everywhere at once. So that means that they have to basically become more of a leader and less of a doer, often providing direction, communicating it, spending a lot of time talking about these things and even documenting these things. Horrible thought, rather than just relying on the team grabbing them at the right moment when it's needed.
Well, I think that's there's so much great stuff there about thinking about the size and the complexity and just the importance of keeping those connected, right? So that you are moving towards one product and one goal. What are thoughts about having movement between team members? If you have 4 teams focused on one product, really,
Can you move people around? Yes, but not during a sprint. Can you have somebody on more than one team? Yes, you can do all of these things, and you even could move people during a sprint. The challenge with that, I find, is it becomes a bit messy and hard for the people. Focus, homeness, or whatever. Which I think COVID has taught us that we are, by very nature, animals that like other animals. We're not like solitary. We're not like that I always picture the sort of lion and the sort of on its own. We like our pride around us, as it were. So moving teams can be very challenging with regard to that. However, there's no reason why at planning you couldn't restructure the teams. Now, obviously, we've read the 5 dysfunctions of a team and all. So storming, norming, there is an overhead to this. However, in very mature organizations where there's a consistent culture across the whole organization, the movement of people in throughout teams is actually incredibly beneficial, because you get that sort of different perspective. You get to learn stuff. It's like pairing. The best pairings I've ever seen are between product managers and testers, product managers and product marketers. It gives you a different point of view, right? So moving's okay. It comes at a cost, and just remember, you've got a great time to review that, which is the retrospective, which then you can feed that back into the process and go, oh, that didn't work well. We brought Bob in and all he did was shout at everybody.
Poor Bob.
Poor Bob. He's got a lot of anger issues.
All right, let's dig into some roles questions. There's always some of these, right? The first one was a difference between business owner versus product owner.
Oh my God. Well, unfortunately, it depends, because there's no well-defined definition it might be in Wikipedia, but I wouldn't necessarily trust it. So the emphasis of the product owner is the thing that they're working on, the product. Now that the business may have multiple products, but also there's a lot more to a product than the product. There's selling it, there's accounting for it, there's all of these other things that aren't normally the responsibility of a product manager or a product owner, and that tends to be the responsibility of the business. However, the best product managers and product owners tend to have a really good idea. People say that product managers are the voice of the customer. I'm like, yeah, but they're kind of got they're a bit multiple personality, because they're the voice of the customer, the voice of the business, the voice of the constraints, whether that's the constraints of the organization, the culture, the whatever, the mission of the organization, regulatory, all of this kind of stuff. They're the embodiment of all of that. Now, the business tends to represent the business. Customers tend to represent customers. The legal people tend to represent legal people, whatever that they are. The accountants represent accountants. You bring the product manager and product owner brings all of those together and makes decisions about, and that's what value is ultimately. It's the trade-offs between all of those things, usually the first few times wrong as well, but that is their job. So should they be only one of those things? Should they be just all about customers? They care deeply about the customer, yes, but you can't build a perfect product for the customer without managing the constraints around that perfect product. You have to be very wary of the economic reality of those constraints, or the physical reality. So anyway, so it's all of those things. So the difference, primarily, I see it as the business person represents the business. The product owner represents a lot more than just the business. Yes.
Excellent. All right. Product marketing's role in Agile Scrum.
That's really interesting. So that's a really interesting question, because we're seeing actually Agile used a lot and Scrum used a lot in product marketing teams now. In fact, so much, I probably can't say that's a secret thing we haven't done yet. Anyway, maybe one day there might be a class. You never know. I was like, damn it. You see, that's the reason why when I worked for MI6, I was always in trouble. Anyway, oh my God, I shouldn't even said that, should I? You see, I'm just not designed for this. Anyway, so number one, a lot of product marketing organizations use Scrum to manage their product marketing campaigns, the creation of, thought leadership, materials, website, blah, blah, blah. I actually like that when it's not a separate organization, when it's a chapter or a guild inside an organization, but where the product marketeers live very deeply within the Scrum teams. Because ultimately a product is useless if it doesn't get marketed, given out, right? The benefit of having people with expertise and experience inside the teams, it helps inform how that how that product is built. The distinction between product marketing and product is often very gray. Is that product documentation or is that marketing material? Is that, so ideally I love to see those people in. Now, in most large organizations, it's layers and layers of complexity. So you get product marketing is sort of like what we described as system product marketing, the people that build the generic data sheets, the generic this, the generic that, the website copy for the main website. And then you have geo product marketing that live in separate teams outside. And then, of course, you invite some of those geo product marketers to your sprint reviews, and marketing material is part of your definition of done and part of the increment. So they literally see it incrementally being built, and then they go, I don't like that. If they're from England or whatever, that's rubbish, that is. And they like, because that's the English geo guys. And, and the product marketers are, why? And there's an interesting and like, well, and that's really, really useful. So I love teams that have product marketing. Now you're going to say, well, then if you have all the people that you need in, on a team, doesn't the team get really big? Well, potentially. So you then have to think about, well, do we need that in one person there, or can actually that product marketing person work with be a shared service across multiple teams, helping them build the materials necessary? And that's all about agility, right? And it's all about scale, because suddenly then you get this sort of like this competency being expressed in many, like security. A lot of people talk about security in the same way. Should that be, yes, in a small organization there might be on a Scrum team. In a larger organization, there may be a shared person whose job is to help all of the teams become secure or do more security stuff. The same with product marketing, the same with testing, the same with any of those, data, analytics, etc., etc. And experiment with some things. Try different compositions and see if it works, if it doesn't work.
But I think that's a really great point, though, to think of the advantages of product marketing being more integrated into this process, the points of view, the perspective, and also like we've all done it, right? We've all seen it where the product is done and then there's this giant delay because it's like, well, did anyone tell them it was coming?
Yeah.
Right?
How do we talk about this thing?
Right.
What is it again? Why is it called that? Yeah.
Right. And being able to kind of be part of that, I think it really makes product marketing a much better voice of the product also to the rest of the organization and the sales and marketing. It's a much more coordinated pieces than a like a firm handoff, because that's just not what we see these days.
Yeah, handoffs are a disaster, but let's not belittle the value that good product marketing has in a team. And in fact, this isn't about getting rid of product marketing. This is about amplifying its use.
Yes.
Because there's so many products that if you'd have just thought about how people perceive it when they try to buy it and get access to it, that it's just wrong. The naming, the structures, and so that can help to influence. When you write that data sheet after the event, how many times have you thought, oh, why doesn't it do that? Wouldn't it make more sense to do it like this? You can't help it. It's a fantastic value. And sharing that skill, getting teammates, and I know as maybe I'm a hardcore software engineer and it's a software product that I'm building. I'm like, last thing I want to do is think about marketing. Really? Well, do you want your product to be used? Oh, I don't care about that. I just want the elegance of the software. Well, software isn't. I think Steve Jobs proved that elegance is less valuable than usability. And it's those sort of things. Though every time I try to use my bank, my credit card at a supermarket or whatever, and their products automatically different and unusable, and I'm like, why don't we? There's a very interesting relationship between UX and product marketing that I think is something that we need to explore more deeply, because I think they're the same side of the different sides of the same coin, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think also, we always talk about product marketing being the experts on the buyer part of the customer, right? And
Yeah.
you can shorthand it and say, well, you build for users and you sell to buyers, but that is, I think that's a little bit naive in the complexity of what those processes look like, and how we need to approach them. So bringing that point of view in as
It's
well is very important.
so that's awesome. I've not heard that before, and I love it, because bringing the buyer in, the relationship between the buyer and the consumer is huge,
Hmm.
and organization like Atlassian, for instance, they did not have an enterprise strategy until very, so what I saw from just looking from the outside when I was an analyst at Forrester is I saw basically islands of Atlassian everywhere in organizations and never brought together. And ultimately, that both hurt the customer because they were so different and everybody was just arguing about which instance they needed to work to. And it didn't work well for Atlassian because because they were basically being overwhelmed by a customer because of that. So having that buyer persona represented earlier in the development of products, I think is incredibly powerful. Now, how they do that depends on the situation, whether it's some sort of shared service, but at least they need to go to the sprint reviews.
Yeah, yep, absolutely. All right, we're going to finish up with a couple of questions around sort of change and implementation. First, all right, this person currently works as a Scrum Master. Unfortunately, the product owners assigned to the stakeholders do not have the knowledge or competencies required to be one. What would you recommend to start to guide them in the path?
Oh wow, that's super, super hard. And obviously the Scrum Master, that falls on the Scrum Master. That's
Yep.
one of they serve the Scrum team, they serve the product owner, and they serve the organization. So that's challenging. So what I would probably do, so the most important single thing that a product owner can provide for the team is a clearly articulated direction. So the product goal is a manifestation of that. It then gets decomposed into product backlog items. So the first thing that I would work on with any product owner that was new to this was I'd try to find out why. Not why why they don't know what's going on, but why the product is, what's the purpose, what's the goal. And I would try to get them to focus on that. And that means that they would have to then start, in the case of this example, working with other stakeholders. And so the first thing that the Scrum Master would do is try to get the product owner to understand why, and then try to then find the people that know why, then try to make that transparent to the whole Scrum team or teams if there's multiple teams. And then we can use that to start building the backlog or informing the backlog if we've already got one, so that we can start making the product backlog, more outcome oriented, because that's crucial as well. So then what we're doing is we're leveraging the product owner to provide the direction for the team, and taking advantage of the team to do everything else to fill in all the gaps, because at least they know where we're going, what the mission is, the why. And if you do that first, I think you're in a really, really good position. Product owner, product manager, really hard job, because you're
Yep.
managing, you got to be, I mean, people look at you as though you're the expert in everything around the customer, the buyer, the organization, getting money, testing, or everything. And you're really not. But what you can be an expert in is the why. And if you invest in that, then everything else just starts to come from that.
I think that's such a smart advice. I think a lot of people would start the other way, right? Right in the details, like
Mm,
make sure they understand all of the processes and the sort of rituals and those pieces. But by starting at top A, that's where the value of that role is. That's
yeah.
the main goal. And when the team sees a value of a person, even if they're inconsistent in some of the execution of their pieces, that makes the team buy into that person, and that also gives that person um confidence to grow into, right?
Yeah.
They have a role, they have a point of view. I think it's much smarter than trying to go, okay, let's make sure they understand all the bits and pieces. No, let's make sure that the core value that we need that role to bring is first and foremost.
Yeah, and the detail of, or is it a sprint review? How do you do story points? All that sort of stuff. Who cares? If the product owner can just bring that clarity and bring those guardrails, then everything else will come. And it's also important for the Scrum Master to spend time with that product owner, to make them feel confident, to be able to give that psychological safety, to really have an opinion when they don't feel confident because they've been thrown into the position without the support. Because find out where their boundaries are and then help them work out how to be successful in this. Yeah, scrum mastering a product owner is requires a little bit of persuasion and direction, and definitely helping them understand the organization they fit in. So all fun though.
Yes. All right. So now we're going to talk about championing it in different types of organizations. Two questions. I bet you could even guess which ones. But one, what advice could you provide folks trying to guide or coach organizations out of a waterfall based approach towards one that includes experimenting with solutions and iteratively delivering value?
Yeah, if I only knew that, because
I
every
know. That's the
organization.
big question.
Yeah, when I was an analyst at Forrester, I coined the term water scrum fall, because everybody said they were doing Scrum, but they were doing it in the context of a waterfall. And you're like, awesome, that works brilliantly. I think the most important thing that I would always advocate is getting stuff, showing it quickly, getting to done as quickly as possible, demonstrating value quickly. If you can, still, I accept that that your traditional organization will want to do loads and loads of planning, fair enough, whatever they want. But then let's get to the smallest chunk of value as quickly as possible and demonstrate. And then over time, they'll realize that spending all that time planning and analyzing up front, and then holding everybody accountable to those tasks, becomes less and less relevant as we start delivering value in a more incremental way. So get stuff out as quickly as possible, and that will encourage your leaders to start thinking, you know, about risk differently. They say, well, one of the reasons why waterfall is often adopted conceptually is because we want to know everything, because we are very scared about it, and then we want to see progress against it. But actually, the only progress that really makes sense is the work that is done that delivers value to the business, to the customers, to the outcomes that we seek. So trying to get that earlier in the life cycle, accepting that you will have to do some planning, accepting that but don't invest millions of hours in that. Spend the 20% rather than the 80%, then get going and see where that takes you. I think that's the only advice I would give.
Yeah, I think we have a lot of organizations we work with that are large enterprise organizations, and change can be difficult there, right? You feel like you're steering the cruise boat, but I think the idea of creating, even if it's casually, a sort of incubator that uses this kind of approach within a team or on a specific project shows, to your point, starts to build the muscle in the organization. It shows the value, and it shows that the risks that we're afraid of, these sort of boogeyman monsters that we have in our head of what will happen if we don't do all the planning, you start to see that that's not the case. And so it's that small spot that comes big. And I think honestly, that's often the most effective kind of change as well. Like trying to make a sweeping change is can be difficult. So, where can you make a difference, and which team
It,
can you guys really focus on?
and COVID has been a horrible experience. Obviously, 500,000 people died in America. It's devastating. But the one very small shining glimmer of light within this whole thing is people accept that they can't plan in the level of rigor that they historically have across a whole 18-month, 2 year. So now that gives us the latitude, I think, to focus on what we're going to do in the next 3 months. What are we going to do in the next 6 sprints? And that I think that gives us the support, and frankly, and it also highlights how ridiculous these long-term plans were, really, to the level of detail that we had them. That doesn't mean we can't have goals. That doesn't mean we can't have a roadmap. That doesn't mean we can't have aspirations, but we should be continually incrementally delivering against those goals, because we don't know what it's going to be like tomorrow. We don't know what the situation's going to be.
That is 100% spot on, Dave, right? I mean, just as a member of the executive leadership team, right? Like the way we have to look at our business and steer it's in a much shorter period, right? The speed at which we need to be able to pivot. And, if you learn anything, it's that I can't predict what's going to happen. And so creating an organization at every level that's agile, right? From the executive team to the product marketing team to the development teams to two is really how we're able to respond to shifts, both terrible ones like COVID, but also opportunities, right?
Oh,
How many
definitely.
opportunities, if you step back and you think about it, were you like, man, if we'd just been able to pivot to take advantage of that or to try and see, and building that type of organization is I think what's going to separate us out going forward, both to respond to problems and opportunities.
I agree, Rebecca, and the jury's still out whether this has to be a whole new group of organizations or whether existing organizations really can change to be this. The jury is still out, and I'm a natural optimist, so I believe that we have the capacity to reinvent our organizations to be more agile from the ground up. However, it's going to be challenging, and we have to step away from that industrial mindset and really focus on the customers, focus on the outcomes. The work will follow.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, it's change. It's change at every level, and change is hard, even if in theory you're good. But I do editorializing here, of course. But if your organization wasn't able to make that shift in mindset during COVID when it was so critical, it's going to be hard to find a different. You're either a really behind the curve within your industry, or you wonder what would it take then to make that shift if something as monumental as that didn't.
Yeah, exactly. And you talk about going back to normal, but I do not believe there will
No.
be normal. This is a new normal, and I'm not sure there is ever going to be a normal. I think there's a realization that this historic approach of thinking of work as a finite game, as opposed to an infinite game, and that means that the concept of an infinite game is people don't win, rules change continuously, there is no umpire that we know of, or there might be but we just don't know of them. Sort of, you don't win, businesses don't win. They continually incrementally deliver value, and I think we have to step away from that. And there's lots of reason, the how capital is allocated, funding's going to have to change, how the role of organizations like product marketing and all of those are going to have to change, the alignment to architecture and the underlying building blocks of the systems that we use has to change. There's lots of things that are going to have to change, as you rightly said, and that is hard, but
Hmm.
it's also exciting
Yep.
because we can build amazing things. Come on, we put a blooming a car-sized thing on Mars. I mean, and it's giving these high definition, it's drilling holes and stuff. That's a helicopter. I mean, wow, if we can do that, come on. Can't we
Yeah.
just improve that insurance app? Can't we just, can't we just build, what, can't we change our banking system so we can have more than 200 wire transfers? Let's come on.
Awesome. All right, Dave, we talked about a bunch of different things today, and this is an area of which your knowledge is only surpassed by your passion, right? So if you're if you were going to have people embrace two things starting tomorrow based on what we talked about today, or just based on this concept of sort of building these agile organizations that can pivot and evolve, what are like the two things you want them to think about when they leave?
I guess stop managing, start leading. I think, it's all about direction, it's all about guide rails, it's all about in taking this passion and getting it to people that can execute on it, infecting, oh God, we can't use that word anymore, I guess, but instilling this passion in your teams and your individuals, so much more important than managing the detail. Let that happen. I mean, it has to happen, but let it happen. I think that's number one. And I think the other thing is, sort of like, which is connected to that, is the relationship with product goal. I think, it was added to the Scrum Guide in November last year, in November 2020. And I think it's the most empowering thing that we can take on board. It provides us with that ability to lead. It takes us away from the sort of minutiae and focuses us on the goal that we're trying to achieve, hence its name, goal. So I think those two things are super crucial. And I guess the other thing is, let's not get into these fights between product owner and product manager, and is that my job description and that. Who cares? I don't care. I really don't. Product owner
Mm-hmm.
is all about Scrum. There's a set of accountabilities necessary for being effective with Scrum. Product manager, obviously, you guys at Pragmatic have a massive list of all those competencies that you need to think about to be successful. You bring those together, deliver value to customers, all's good.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you, Dave. A genuine pleasure having you on. I'm sure everyone listening feels the same, and hopefully we can do it again.
I hope so, Rebecca. Thank you for listening, everybody. Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks, everyone. That does it for today's episode. Don't forget to join us next week when we tackle another great topic designed to help you elevate your product, your company, and your career.